When Viktor Frankl was imprisoned in the Auschwitz concentration camp, he faced one of the most extreme situations a human being can face. However, instead of giving in to despair, Frankl began to question his life's purpose. He asked himself, "If I can find purpose in the midst of so much suffering, won't that give me the strength to overcome this situation?" This question may seem simple, but it is profoundly powerful. By asking himself about purpose, Frankl was actually questioning the very nature of human existence. He was asking himself whether, even in the midst of horror and misery, there is a reason to go on living. And it was this question that became the starting point for his search for meaning, in a place where human life was treated as disposable. Frankl knew that if he did not find purpose, he risked becoming just another concentration camp victim. He knew that if he did not find a reason to continue living, he would give in to hopelessness and discouragement. However, by asking himself about purpose, Frankl was actually asserting his dignity as a human being. He was saying that no matter what the Nazis did to him, he still had control over his own mind and spirit. This question also led him to a fundamental discovery. Frankl realized that even in the midst of suffering, there are three things that cannot be taken away from a person: the ability to choose one's attitude, the ability to find meaning in one's experience, and the ability to imagine a different future. These three things became the basis for his theory of logotherapy, which focuses on finding purpose and meaning in the midst of suffering. The question Frankl asked himself in the concentration camp is a question we should all ask ourselves in our lives. In times of crisis or despair, we should ask ourselves, what is the purpose of all this? Or what am I learning from this experience? This question can lead us on a journey of discovery and growth, and can give us the strength to overcome even the most difficult situations. When we are immersed in a difficult situation, it is common to feel lost and without a way out. Suffering can lead us to question the purpose of our life, raising questions such as, what is all this for? Why is this happening to me? Or what did I do to deserve this? However, it is precisely in these moments that we must seek a deeper purpose. Viktor Frankl, an Austrian psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, knew all about suffering. He endured indescribable experiences in Nazi concentration camps, where he lost his family and his freedom. However, instead of giving in to despair, Frankl found purpose in his suffering. He realized that even in the midst of pain and oppression, there was a choice to be made, the choice to find higher meaning. For Frankl, purpose was not something you found, but something you created. He believed that even in the worst circumstances, there was always an opportunity to find meaning, to find a why. And it was this search for purpose that helped him survive the concentration camps. But how can we find purpose in the midst of suffering? Frankl suggests that we should look beyond our own pain and see how we can serve others. This can be done in simple ways, such as listening to a friend who is going through a difficult time or helping a family member who needs support. By doing this, we are finding purpose beyond our own pain, a purpose that makes us feel like we are doing something bigger than ourselves. Furthermore, Frankl also reminds us that suffering can be an opportunity for growth. When we are going through a difficult situation, we can choose to either give in to despair or use the experience to learn and grow. We can use suffering to develop our compassion, empathy, and resilience. We can use suffering to become stronger and wiser people. In the end, finding purpose in the midst of suffering is a choice. It's a choice to find higher meaning, to serve others, and to grow as people. It's a choice to not give in to despair and to find a reason in the midst of pain. And it's that choice that can give us the strength and courage to keep going, even when all seems lost. When we find ourselves in impossible situations, it's easy to feel trapped, that there's no way out. But Viktor Frankl teaches us that even in the most adverse circumstances, there's always a choice to be made. And it's precisely this freedom of choice that can give us strength and hope. Imagine yourself in a concentration camp, as Frankl was during World War II. You are in a situation that seems to have no end, with no prospect of liberation, no control over your fate. It is easy to feel defeated, without choice. Yet Frankl shows us that even in this environment, there were choices to be made. He chose how to react to his circumstances, how to behave toward his fellow prisoners, how to find meaning in the midst of his suffering. This freedom of choice may seem illusory, but it is precisely this freedom that allows us to find a way out, even when there is no obvious way out. It is the choice of how we will deal with pain, with loss, with adversity. It is the choice of how we will react to the circumstances imposed on us. And it is this choice that can give us strength, that can give us hope. Frankl tells us that in the concentration camp, prisoners had to constantly make decisions about how they were going to survive, how they were going to maintain their dignity, how they were going to find purpose. And it was precisely this choice that allowed them to find meaning in the midst of the horror. They chose how they were going to react to their circumstances. And it was this choice that allowed them to find a way out, even when there was no obvious way out. It is important to note that this freedom of choice does not mean that we will choose the easy way out. We will not always choose the option that brings us comfort or security. Often, we will choose the option that challenges us, that makes us grow, that makes us find a greater purpose. And it is precisely this choice that can give us strength, that can give us hope. In short, freedom of choice in impossible situations is what allows us to find a way out, even when there is no obvious way out. It is the choice of how we will react to circumstances, of how we will find meaning in the midst of suffering. And it is this choice that can give us strength, that can give us hope. When we are faced with a difficult situation, it is easy to feel like there is no way out. Adversity confronts us with our own vulnerability and makes us question whether we are capable of overcoming the obstacles that present themselves. However, it is precisely in these moments that the attitude we adopt can make all the difference. Viktor Frankl, one of the most important psychologists of the 20th century, knew this very well. He himself went through terrible experiences in Nazi concentration camps during World War II, but he was able to find a way to overcome the pain and hopelessness. For Frankl, attitude was the key to finding meaning in the midst of adversity. He believed that even when we have no choice about our circumstances, we can choose how we respond to them. This choice may seem small, but it is crucial to our well-being and our ability to overcome challenges. When faced with a difficult situation, we can choose to either give in to hopelessness or find a way to make sense of the experience. Frankl called this choice inner attitude, which is the ability to choose how we respond to circumstances regardless of them. One of the most striking things about Frankl's attitude is that he was not a naturally optimistic man. He was a man who had been through terrible experiences, who had lost family and friends, who had seen the worst of humanity. Yet he chose not to give in to despair. Instead, he chose to find meaning in those experiences, even when they seemed meaningless. This does not mean that he did not suffer or feel pain. It means that he chose not to let pain and hopelessness bring him down. Frankl's attitude reminds us that even when there is no apparent way out, we can find a way to overcome obstacles. This doesn't mean we will find an easy or quick solution, but it does mean that we will find a way to make sense of the experience. When we choose the right attitude, we can begin to find meaning in the midst of adversity. We can begin to see that even in the worst situations, there is always something we can learn, something we can grow from, something we can find. And it is this attitude that can make all the difference between hopelessness and hope. When we are in the midst of a crisis, it is easy to lose perspective and feel completely lost. It is as if we are in a maze with no way out, surrounded by walls of pain and hopelessness. But it is precisely in these moments that we need to find purpose, a meaning in our suffering. Viktor Frankl, an Austrian psychiatrist who survived the Holocaust, knew all too well what it was like to suffer. He saw death, loss, and destruction on a massive scale. Yet instead of giving in to despair, he found purpose in his suffering. He discovered that even in the midst of horror, there was an opportunity to find meaning. Frankl believed that suffering was not something to be avoided at all costs, but rather something that could be transformed into an opportunity for growth. He said that suffering is an inherent part of human life, but it is precisely in this suffering that we can find purpose. Finding meaning in suffering doesn't mean that the suffering goes away. It means that even in the midst of pain, you find a reason to keep fighting. You find a reason to get up again, even when all seems lost. For Frankl, meaning was not something you find, but something you create. You create meaning by choosing how you respond to suffering. You choose whether you will give in to despair or whether you will find a way to transform pain into something more. Finding meaning in suffering doesn't mean you're happy with the situation either. It means you're willing to find a way to grow from the pain. You're willing to learn from the experience, even if it's difficult. When you find meaning in suffering, you begin to see life differently. You begin to understand that life is not just about happiness and pleasure, but also about pain and growth. You begin to understand that suffering is an opportunity to become stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. Finding meaning in suffering is not easy. It is a difficult choice that you have to make every day, but it is this choice that can change the way you see life. It is this choice that can transform your suffering into an opportunity for growth and transformation. When we are faced with a difficult situation, it is easy to confuse suffering with suffering. However, these two concepts have very different meanings, and understanding this distinction is crucial to finding a way out in times of crisis. Grief is a natural response to stress or trauma. It is an emotional reaction that can be intense and painful, but it is a natural process of the body and mind. Grief is not a choice. It is an automatic reaction to an unpleasant situation. When we grieve, we are reacting to a threat or loss, and this reaction may be necessary in order for us to process and cope with the situation. Suffering, on the other hand, is a choice. It is a way of giving in to pain and suffering, rather than finding a way to overcome it. Suffering is a mental attitude that makes us feel powerless and a victim of our circumstances. When we suffer, we are allowing ourselves to be consumed by pain and suffering, rather than finding a way to transform it into something more. Viktor Frankl, one of the leading experts on suffering and resilience, argues that the difference between suffering and suffering lies in the attitude we adopt towards pain. According to him, suffering is inevitable, but suffering is optional. This means that, regardless of what we are going through, we can choose how we respond to pain. We can choose to suffer and try to find a way to overcome the situation, or we can choose to suffer and give in to the pain. When we choose to suffer, we are allowing ourselves to be defined by pain and suffering. This can lead to a spiral of negativity and despair, making it even harder to find a way out in times of crisis. When we choose to suffer, we are acknowledging the pain and suffering, but we are also acknowledging our ability to overcome them. This allows us to find a way to transform the pain into something more and to find a way out of the suffering. So the next time you find yourself in a difficult situation, remember that you have a choice. You can choose to suffer and try to find a way to overcome the situation, or you can choose to suffer and give in to the pain. The choice is yours, and the difference between suffering and suffering can be the key to finding a way out of a crisis. When we are stuck in a difficult situation, our mind naturally looks for a way out, a way to escape the suffering or pain. However, sometimes there is no way out, or at least there is no obvious way out. This is where the ability to change perspective rather than change the situation becomes crucial. Viktor Frankl, an Austrian psychiatrist who survived the Holocaust, knew this all too well. In his book Man's Search for Meaning, he describes how in the concentration camp, prisoners had to find ways to make sense of their lives, even in the most inhumane conditions. And it was there that Frankl discovered that the ability to change perspective was essential for survival. Changing your perspective doesn't mean denying reality or running away from pain. It means finding a way to look at the situation differently, to find deeper meaning or a greater purpose. It's like looking at an impressionist painting up close, and then suddenly you step back and see the beauty of the whole picture. When we change our perspective, we can find a way to accept the situation, even if we don't like it. And that's where liberation begins. You no longer have to fight reality, you can start working with it. You start finding ways to grow and develop, even in the most difficult conditions. One of the most powerful things we can do when we're stuck in a difficult situation is to ask ourselves, what can I learn from this? Or how can I grow as a person because of this? These questions shift our perspective, shifting our focus from what can I do to escape this, to what can I do to grow from this. Changing your perspective also means finding a way to give meaning to your pain. It doesn't mean that the pain goes away, but it does mean that you can find a way to honor the pain, to find a higher purpose for it. It's like you've been carrying a heavy burden, and suddenly you discover that the burden is actually a gift that allows you to grow and develop in ways you never imagined possible. So when you feel stuck in a difficult situation, remember that the ability to change your perspective is a powerful tool. It's not easy. It takes practice and patience, but it is possible. And that's when you can begin to find a way to freedom, even in the most difficult conditions. When we are stuck in a difficult situation with no apparent way out, hope can seem like a distant illusion. However, it is precisely in these moments that hope becomes more crucial than ever. According to Viktor Frankl, hope is not just a passing emotion, but a deliberate choice we can make, even when all seems lost. Hope is not a denial of reality, but a way of interpreting it differently. Instead of focusing on what is missing, hope allows us to focus on what we still have, what we can still control. This does not mean that problems will disappear, but that we can find a way to deal with them more effectively. Hope allows us to find purpose, even in the midst of suffering. Furthermore, hope has the power to inspire concrete actions. When we have faith in a possible solution, we begin to look for ways to achieve it. We begin to seek help, to read books, to talk to experts. Hope motivates us to act, to fight for a way out, even when everything seems lost. And it is precisely at this moment that we begin to find creative solutions that we would never have thought of if it were not for hope. Hope can also be a source of comfort in times of despair. When all seems lost, hope can be the only thing we have left. It is the light at the end of the tunnel, the thread of hope that keeps us together. And it is precisely in these moments that we can find a sense of purpose, a sense that there is something bigger than ourselves working on our behalf. However, hope is not a natural emotion. It is something we need to cultivate, even when everything seems against us. We need to choose to believe that there is a way out, even when we don't see one. We need to choose to believe that there is something better ahead, even when everything seems bleak. And it is precisely at this moment that hope becomes a deliberate choice, a choice we can make at every moment. In short, hope is the thread that holds us together in moments of despair. It is the light that illuminates the path, even when all seems lost. It is the choice we can make at every moment, to believe that there is a way out, to believe that there is something better ahead. And it is precisely in those moments that we can find a sense of purpose, a sense that there is something greater than ourselves that is working in our favor. When we face difficult situations, it is common to feel powerless and helpless. However, it is precisely in these moments that the strength of the human spirit reveals itself. Viktor Frankl, one of the greatest thinkers of the 20th century, knew this better than anyone. He not only survived the Holocaust, but also developed a philosophy that teaches us to find meaning even in the deepest adversity. The strength of the human spirit in the face of adversity can accomplish incredible things. It can transform suffering into growth, pain into wisdom, and loss into opportunity. When faced with obstacles, our first reaction is often denial, anger, or hopelessness. However, it is precisely at these times that we must remember that the human spirit is capable of overcoming any obstacle. Frankl said that the last of the human freedoms is the choice of attitude in any given set of circumstances. This means that no matter what is happening in our lives, we always have a choice about how we respond. One of the most impressive examples of the strength of the human spirit in the face of adversity is the story of Malala Yousafzai, the young Pakistani girl who survived a terrorist attack and continued to fight for education for girls in her country. Malala could have given in to fear and pain, but she chose to use her experience to inspire millions of people around the world. She is a living example of the strength of the human spirit in the face of adversity. Another example is the story of Nelson Mandela, who spent 27 years in prison for fighting against apartheid in South Africa. When he was finally released, Mandela could have become a bitter and hateful man. However, he chose to forgive his captors and work to unite the country. Mandela is an example of the strength of the human spirit in the face of adversity, showing that even in the most difficult times, we can choose peace and reconciliation. The strength of the human spirit in the face of adversity can also be seen in our daily lives. When we face a problem at work, an illness in the family, or a personal loss, it is easy to feel overwhelmed and helpless. However, it is precisely at these times that we must remember that we have a choice in how we respond. We can choose to give in to despair or find a way to overcome the obstacle. We can choose to focus on the pain or find deeper meaning in our experience. In short, the strength of the human spirit in the face of adversity is one of the greatest strengths we have at our disposal. It is a strength that allows us to transform suffering into growth, pain into wisdom, and loss into opportunity. It is a strength that allows us to choose how to respond to life's circumstances, even when they seem impossible to overcome. Viktor Frankl's final lesson is perhaps the most powerful of all: finding your way out of despair. It's easy to talk about finding meaning and purpose when things are going well, but what about when you're at rock bottom, with no light at the end of the tunnel? That's when true courage and resilience are tested. Frankl knew this better than anyone, having lived through experiences few people could imagine. When we are surrounded by despair, it is easy to lose hope. It is easy to believe that there is no way out, that we are doomed to suffer forever. But Frankl teaches us that even in the midst of the deepest darkness, there is always a choice to be made. We can choose how we respond to suffering. We can choose how we deal with pain. And that choice is what can make all the difference. Frankl tells the story of his time in the Auschwitz concentration camp, where he was forced to work in inhumane conditions and witnessed the deaths of thousands of people. Even in the midst of this horror, he found a way to find meaning. He began giving lectures to the other prisoners, sharing his philosophy on the search for meaning. In a place where death was a constant threat, Frankl found a way to give hope. And this is what he teaches us, that hope does not depend on circumstances, but on the choices we make. We can choose to see beauty in the midst of ugliness. We can choose to find meaning in the midst of chaos. And it is this choice that can give us the strength to move forward, even when all seems lost. But how do we do that? How do we find our way out of despair? Frankl teaches us that the answer lies in finding purpose. Finding purpose is not just about finding a goal or an objective. It is about finding a greater meaning to our lives. It is about finding why we are here, what we are here to do. And when we find that purpose, nothing can stop us. Frankl tells us the story of a man who was imprisoned in a concentration camp and had lost his entire family. This man was completely desperate, with no hope of getting out of the camp alive. But one day, he found a purpose. He began to help the other prisoners, to care for them, and to give them hope. And that is what gave him the strength to carry on. And this is what Frankl teaches us, that purpose is the key to finding a way out of despair. That no matter what we are going through, we can always find a greater purpose. And that when we find that purpose, nothing can stop us. We can overcome any obstacle, any challenge. We can find a way out of despair. And so Viktor Frankl leaves us with a question: what do we do when we see no way out? The answer is not easy, but it is simple. It is finding meaning in suffering. It is choosing our attitude in the face of adversity. It is having the courage to change our perspective rather than changing the situation. It is remembering that, even in the midst of despair, hope is the light that guides us. It is understanding that freedom of choice is our greatest weapon against oppression. And it is knowing that, in the end, the strength of the human spirit is capable of overcoming any obstacle. And so, instead of giving in to despair, we can find a way out of despair. We can transform suffering into an opportunity for growth, a chance to find a deeper purpose. We can choose not to suffer, but to suffer with dignity. And we can remember that even in the deepest darkness, there is always a way out. And that way out is the choice to find meaning, to have hope, to have courage. It is the choice to live, even when life seems to have no meaning. It is the choice to be human, in all its forms and in all its weaknesses. This is Viktor Frankl's final lesson, that the way out of despair is always possible, if only we choose to see it. Now that you've discovered how Viktor Frankl found meaning in the midst of suffering, it's time to reflect on your own life. What is your biggest challenge right now? What are you facing that you don't know how to overcome? Share with us in the comments below. And if you liked this video, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications, as we will continue to explore more inspirational and motivational topics. Also, if you know someone who is going through a difficult time, please share this video with them, as it may be just what they need to find strength and inspiration. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.